March 17th, 1945. 09:42 hours. Altitude, barely 500 feet. The landscape blurs into an olive smear as a battered Mosquito McCallus 6-can rips across the Ardennes tree line. Inside, Flight Officer Tom Harker grips the yoke with white knuckles. His navigator, Leo Braddock, is yelling coordinates through a haze of oil smoke and adrenaline. The port engine stutters, rattling bolts, coughing smoke, threatening to seize. But the Mosquito keeps flying. And behind them, 9 jet engines scream. Messerschmitt, Me-262s, the Luftwaffe's secret weapon, a fleet of V-12-powered Hawks slicing through the sky at over 45 miles per hour. It's a kill squad, a formation built to erase bombers from the sky, each one armed with 30mm cannons, each one hunting a single target. That target is a wooden plane, a plywood and balsa Frankenstein called the Wooden Wonder. Fast, yes, but not jet fast. Not 1945 fast. By every known measure, the Mosquito should have been a smoldering ruin 5 minutes ago, but it's not. It's still running. And impossibly, it's gaining. From the German formation, one pilot radios in. They're accelerating. Negative visual range in 10 seconds. Command doesn't believe him. No one does. Because they know the stats. Mosquito top speed, 380, maybe 400 mph with the right tailwind. The Me-262's cruise at 510. The math is bulletproof. But this Mosquito, tail number K2764, is defying the numbers. It hugs the terrain, cuts low through river mist, slips in and out of cloud cover like smoke with wings. 2 jets peel off to gain altitude and attack from above, only to find their engines protesting the rapid climb. Another overshoots and loses target lock. A 4th's gun jams on descent. The Mosquito doesn't fight. It runs, and it runs like hell. 7 minutes into the pursuit, it disappears. Into fog, into dead silence, into the kind of radio static that drives hunters mad. By the time Allied radar picks it up again, K22764 is 11 miles west of the skirmish site, descending hard toward a forward airstrip on the Belgian border. It lands on fumes. The port engine dies. The undercarriage buckles. Both airmen emerge shaken, coughing, alive. But the plane? It's not the same Mosquito that took off 2 hours earlier. Technicians swarm the fuselage. They expect a miracle, or a ghost. What they find instead is a violation. The airframe is modified. Not factory issue, not logged. Reinforced in key stress points using scrap metal, epoxy, and what looks like rusted braces salvaged from a destroyed Jeep chassis. Steel. In a wooden plane. It shouldn't have flown. It should have splintered under jet pursuit. But it held. And not just held. It flexed, surged, and hit a speed the Mosquito was never meant to reach. 438 mph, clocked via Doppler shadow. The brass are speechless. Who signed off on this? One major demands. Nobody did. Because the man who made the fix wasn't a designer or engineer. He wasn't even in the air that day. His name? Sergeant Alec Marrison, a Canadian field mechanic stationed at an auxiliary depot 2 days before the mission. No medals, no command. Just a wrench, a welder, and a hunch that the airframe failures grounding dozens of Mosquitoes weren't due to age, but to a structural flaw that could be reinforced. They laughed when he tried to explain it. Called it a rust job, a scrapyard patch, something out of a farm shed, until it outran Germany's best jets. Until it made 9 Me-262s look slow. Until a plane patched with metal scars became the most untouchable bomber in the air for 7 minutes that changed everything. This is that story. By 1945, the Mosquito was both legendary and neglected. It had once been the RAF's crown jewel, a twin-engine lightning bolt made from wood, glue, and speed. But as the war dragged into its bloody final year, whispers started circulating through RAF hangars and command rooms alike. The Mosquito's done. Pilots grumbled. Maintenance crews swore. and brass started quietly shifting operational priorities toward more rugged, all-metal airframes. The problem wasn't performance. On paper, the Mosquito could still outrun most German piston fighters. The problem was structural fatigue. The Mosquito was a marvel of wartime necessity, assembled not in aircraft factories but furniture workshops, piano manufacturers, and boatyards. Its lightweight wooden body had given it blistering speed and unmatched versatility. It had been a bomber, a night fighter, a photo recon craft. But by early 1945, the RAF had logged dozens of unexplained failures. Wing joints cracking mid-flight, fuselages buckling under evasive maneuvers, landing gear collapsing from stress fractures nobody could trace. The theory was simple: age. These were early warplanes, flown hard, stored in cold climates, bombed out of hangars and patched together again and again. Allied engineers in London blamed the cold, the glue, the balsa wood. Command considered grounding the entire fleet by summer. In Belgium, frontline crews didn't wait for policy. They parked their Mosquitoes in the far corners of the airfields, ghost aircraft awaiting orders that never came. Young mechanics were reassigned to newer squadrons with Tempests, Typhoons, or American Mustangs. The Mosquito was being phased out, not by memo, but by silence. Except Alec Marrison didn't believe it. A soft-spoken, chain-smoking Canadian mechanic, Marrison had spent the last 3 months stationed with 571 Squadron. He'd personally worked on over 30 Mosquitoes, patching their wings, replacing their engine mounts, crawling into the belly of the beast when others wrote them off, and he started to see something others missed. It wasn't just the cold, it wasn't just wear, it was design. Specifically, it was the bonding structure in the forward fuselage, the place where the wooden panels met the engine supports. In theory, the glue was rated for 300 mph flight loads, but Marrison had found that after 50 missions, stress from high-speed dives and thermal expansion was weakening the bond. Not everywhere, just at certain joints. To the RAF, these failures were random. To Marrison, they were a pattern, and he thought he could fix it. But the idea of fixing a Mosquito outside approved procedures was sacrilege. HQ had spent months issuing bulletins on exactly what to not do. Field fixes were discouraged. Replacements were slow. And Marrison's suggestion to reinforce the airframe with braced steel joints was laughed out of the tent. Steel in a Mosquito? You'll tear the frame apart. You want to weld to wood? It'll throw the balance off. Every objection was backed by doctrine. Every dismissal came with a chuckle. Marrison was told to file an incident report and keep his tools clean. But he didn't, not entirely. Because even as command dismissed the Mosquito as obsolete, pilots still flew them. They still ran dangerous solo missions, low-altitude recon, night bombing, radar jamming, and more of them were dying in unexplained crashes. To Marrison, the Mosquito wasn't done. It was being abandoned. And in war, abandonment is a death sentence. So he made a decision, one quiet, unauthorized, untraceable decision. He chose one of the worst-off Mosquitoes on the field, tail number K2764, and he reinforced it. Not with permission, with necessity. No paperwork, no orders, just rivets, plates, and an understanding of stress geometry born from experience, not textbooks. He didn't know it yet, but that plane would go on to face 9 jets in a single mission, and live. But at this moment in March 1945, that idea was laughable. The Mosquito was a dying breed, a relic, a wooden shadow in the jet age. No one took it seriously anymore. Until one plane refused to die. To understand why Alec Marrison's fix was both revolutionary and heretical, we need to go back to the beginning, to the blueprint of the Mosquito itself. Born out of desperation and defiance, the de Havilland Mosquito was never supposed to work. Proposed in 1938, it was a gamble, a frontline combat aircraft made almost entirely of wood. At the time, the British Air Ministry was focused on armor, firepower, and heavy metal. But aircraft designer Geoffrey de Havilland saw the future in speed and weightlessness. He proposed a radical vision, A bomber with no guns, no armor, just speed and agility. Something that could outrun anything, including bullets. The ministry dismissed it. But the war changed everything. By 1940, metal was in short supply. Germany was bombing factories. British industry was strained to the edge. Suddenly, wood, strong, flexible, plentiful, was back on the table. De Havilland's team rushed to design and build the Mosquito with an unconventional mix of birch plywood, balsa core, and phenolic resin glue. The airframe was light, aerodynamic, and could be assembled in furniture factories across the UK. And it worked. Oh, did it work. The first Mosquito prototype flew in 1940. It broke speed records immediately, outperforming Spitfires and Hurricanes in trial runs. When it entered service in 1941, it was a revelation, an unarmed bomber that outran German fighters, a reconnaissance ghost that captured photos no one else could get, a night fighter that could stalk without being heard. By 1943, the Mosquito had earned its nickname, the Wooden Wonder. Fast, silent, lethal. But beneath the legend lay a secret problem. Wood is strong, but it's not immortal, especially not in war. Thousands of Mosquitoes were flown through icy altitudes, tropical humidity, and the blast shockwaves of their own bombs. And over time, the weaknesses of their revolutionary design began to show. Glue joints separated, wood panels swelled, cold soaked into the fuselage, then cracked it with heat when pilots dived. Balsa cores flexed under G-forces. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Not from bullets, but from physics. The most vulnerable spots? The engine mounts, fuselage spars, and the wing-to-body junction. By late 1944, reports poured in. Mid-air structural failures, unexplained crashes, control loss during evasive maneuvers. Investigators blamed the weather, the missions, the age of the aircraft. But the numbers didn't lie. Out of every 100 Mosquitoes deployed on combat operations in the ETO, European Theater of Operations, nearly 19 were grounded due to suspected frame fatigue. That's almost 1 in 5. In some squadrons, the grounding rate was over 30%. The RAF responded with caution. They began rotating Mosquitoes off the front lines, scheduled complete fuselage inspections, urged reduced G-force maneuvers during takeoff and landing. But none of this solved the problem. Because the problem wasn't age or misuse. It was design maturity hitting a wall. The Mosquito had been a miracle solution in 1941. But by 1945, its revolutionary design hadn't evolved with the realities of modern jet-age warfare. It was still fast, but not faster than a Me-262. It was still light, but now too fragile for extended frontline duty. And worst of all, there were too many variants in service. Bombers, night fighters, recon planes, each with different stress tolerances, construction methods, and loadouts. Command couldn't even standardize the problem, so they quietly began to abandon the solution. By March 1945, the majority of Mosquito squadrons operating near Belgium and northern France were facing a painful truth. Their aircraft were no longer invincible. Worse, their losses weren't coming from dogfights. They were coming from failed turns, from structural bends that snapped mid-flight, from dives that ended in silence. And into that silence stepped Alec Marrison. He didn't have de Havilland's resources, he didn't have a design team. But he did have a suspicion. The glue joints and certain stress points weren't just wearing out. They were never meant to last this long. His idea was crude. Add a steel brace, shift load-bearing pressure, reduce torque slippage in high G turns. To brass, it was madness. To the pilots still flying Mosquitoes, it was worth a look. Because by 1945, they weren't asking for miracles anymore. They were just asking to come home alive. War is won with numbers, not myths, not feelings. And when it came to the Mosquito in 1945, the numbers were turning brutal. At the peak of its performance in 1943-44, the de Havilland Mosquito stunned the Luftwaffe. It could carry a 4,000-pound bomb load at speeds rivaling single-engine fighters. Recon Mosquitoes outran Bf-109s. Night fighters shot down German bombers at a 6-to-1 kill ratio. It was fast, agile, deadly, and near silent. But speed ages fast in war. Enter the Me-262. Germany's first operational jet fighter changed everything. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, the 262 outran every Allied aircraft in the sky. Mosquitoes, once uncatchable, were now being spotted, stalked, and swatted out of the sky by pilots who could close the distance in seconds. In late 1944, the RAF logged an alarming trend. Mosquito survivability in contested airspace was dropping. In some sectors, jet intercepts were successful 25% of the time. That means 1 out of every 4 Mosquitoes in high-risk missions was not coming home. By January 1945, the math got worse. 3,219 Mosquitoes remained active in RAF squadrons. 612 were grounded due to structural fatigue or airframe issues. At least 130 were lost in unexplained mid-air structural failures in the prior 9 months. 0 official structural upgrades were approved between March 1944 and March 1945. And then came the unofficial reports, the ones technicians whispered but never logged. Planes vibrating at cruising speed, glue bubbles forming along internal seams, control rods buckling during tight turns. One pilot even claimed he heard his wings creaking like a floorboard in a haunted house just before a dive. But the most damning number came from the speed gap. Mosquito max safe speed, Ho 407 bombers, 419 MPI, fighters, Me-262 cruising speed, 510 MPI, Me-262 attack speed, 540 MPI in shallow dive. That's a gap of over 100 MPI, a death sentence in the open sky. Even with early warning systems, Mosquitoes had just seconds to evade a closing Me-262. Their only defense? Dive. But that stressed their already fragile airframes, and too many didn't pull out in time. By the time Alec Marrison started logging his informal brace tests in February 1945, one thing was clear. The Mosquito was losing the numbers game. The design was brilliant, but it wasn't evolving fast enough to meet the moment, and RAF brass knew it. Behind closed doors, multiple memos floated through fighter commands suggesting that Mosquito squadrons in jet-patrolled airspace be reassigned, grounded, or limited to low-risk recon. High-speed missions would be handed off to Spitfire PR variants or, more radically, American P-51 Mustangs with long-range fuel mods. Translation? The wooden wonder was being mathematically retired, but numbers can deceive. What the charts didn't show were the rare birds that survived, the edge case anomalies, the Mosquitoes that somehow outran jet interceptors, the ones that shouldn't have made it but did. And when intelligence officers began comparing mission data, a strange pattern emerged. The surviving Mosquitoes were often older airframes, patched, customized, reconfigured in the field. One of them, tail number K2764, logged a mission speed of 438 mph. Unverified, unexplained, dismissed. But not by Alec Marrison. He didn't care about policy. He cared about results. And every time he saw one of his patched Mosquitoes come back in one piece, he didn't need a spreadsheet to believe it was working. He had what no algorithm could offer: proof of life. Still, the numbers haunted him. The planes were aging. The math wasn't in their favor. And unless something changed, unless someone fixed what command refused to see, the Mosquito's days were numbered, which is exactly why he broke the rules. March 17th, 1945. Target: Kassel. Objective: precision bombing of a key rail junction. The Allies needed to stall German troop movements into the Ruhr pocket, and they needed fast surgical strikes, ones that could hit without giving the Luftwaffe time to react. Mosquitoes were perfect for the job, in and out, low signature, no escort needed. Except this time, they were wrong. K2764 had been tagged for the mission at the last minute. Officially, it was operational but unstable, a designation meaning it shouldn't fly without a full inspection. But with other aircraft grounded and schedules tight, the brass turned a blind eye. Besides, it had passed a basic test flight the day before. No one looked closer, except Alec Marrison. 2 nights earlier, he'd reinforced the airframe in secret, steel bracing in the wing roots, re-riveted joints under the belly, and a custom mount system connecting the central fuselage to the engine pylons. He didn't log the changes. If discovered, they would void insurance, command certification, and likely get him discharged. But he believed the fix would hold. He had to. At 0712, K-2764 lifted off from RAF Melsbrook, Belgium, with Flight Officer Tom Harker and Navigator Leo Braddock aboard. Weather, clear skies, moderate wind, light fog over low terrain. Visibility, fair. The flight path was simple. Ingress via Maastricht, drop over Kassel. Egress south via Koblenz and back west. Estimated exposure time, 6 minutes. But 6 minutes was all it took to die in the sky. By 0806, K-2764 was over the target. Bombs released. Cameras confirmed the junction was hit. The plane banked hard, too hard for a Mosquito at full fuel weight. Braddock later swore the frame groaned like a wounded beast, but it didn't crack. It surged forward. Then came the sound no Mosquito pilot ever wanted to hear. A low, rising whine, like twin hurricanes sharpening their blades. Me-262s. 9 of them. Diving out of cloud cover, glinting silver in the morning sun. Their engines roaring like thunder. The Luftwaffe had been tipped off, or just lucky. Either way, they were closing fast. In any other Mosquito, the end would have come in under 30 seconds. But something strange happened. Harker gunned the throttle. The Mosquito didn't buckle. It surged. Instead of being overtaken, K-2764 began to pull away. Not enough to escape yet, but enough to survive the first pass. The 262s, built for speed but poor at turning, shot wide. One overshot completely and had to circle back. Harker dropped altitude, a steep dive, normally fatal. But the modified airframe held. Braddock gritted his teeth as the altimeter spun. Then, pull up, hard. Every Mosquito pilot knew this was the danger point. Pull too late, the wings snap. Too soon, you stall. But the braced frame flexed and held. K-2764 skipped over treetops like a stone on a pond. Another 262 dove after them, and again overshot. The Mosquito banked into a narrow ravine, using terrain for cover. Behind them, the jets struggled to keep lock. Too fast, too unwieldy. Their advantage turned to a curse. One by one, the 262s broke off. 2 suffered compressor stalls from over-pushing their jet engines in low maneuvering flight. Another clipped a tree and crashed. The rest lost visual and retreated to base. By the time Harker and Braddock emerged into clear sky, they were alone. No radio chatter, no wingmen. Just a mission log, a wounded plane, and an airframe that had proven the impossible. They limped back to base on one good engine, landing in silence. Ground crews expected a wreck. What they found instead was a Mosquito that had performed a feat even Spitfires couldn't replicate, outmaneuvering 9 jet fighters using speed, guts, and something else, a fix that wasn't supposed to work. That mission shouldn't have been survivable, but it was. Because numbers don't always account for genius, especially the kind done with scrap metal, welding torch, and a bet on physics no one else dared to make. When K-2764 touched down with both crew alive, and no catastrophic damage, the airfield didn't erupt in celebration. It froze in disbelief. Everyone had heard the radio traffic, scrambled, panicked, then silent. A flight that should have ended in wreckage instead delivered something no one expected. A statistical anomaly. But war doesn't like anomalies. It likes patterns, predictability, models, and the Mosquito, by every model, should have failed. The stats leading into that mission were damning. 94 Mosquito sorties flown in contested airspace since January, 27 lost, a 28.7% attrition rate. Average survival time when intercepted by me, 262s, 41 seconds. Number of Mosquitoes known to escape a jet swarm alone, without escorts or counter-fighter support, 0. Until now. When K-2764 made it back, that single data point forced everyone to rerun their math. For field officers, it was a morale boost. For intelligence analysts, it was a glitch. But for Alec Marrison, it was a proof point. His reinforcement scheme, never tested in official trials, never signed off by engineering command, had held through dive pressure, evasive turns, G-force stress, and near supersonic airflow. That should have been enough for immediate investigation. It wasn't. RAF engineering boards were slow to adapt. Command structures were still dominated by risk-averse policies. And besides, the war was entering its final stretch. No one wanted to redesign a dying fleet. But behind closed doors, whispers started circulating. That Mosquito shouldn't have survived. We have to look at the frame. Who touched that aircraft? When Marrison's name came up, reactions split. To the rank and file? He was a savior. To command? He was a rogue element, unauthorized, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. If his fix had failed, it could have embarrassed the entire logistical chain. But it didn't. It worked. And that broke the math. Over the next 3 weeks, 3 more Mosquitoes received unlogged field-level reinforcements. The pattern was clear. Every one of them completed high-risk missions. Not one was lost. Analysts who'd predicted 25 to 30% failure rates were now seeing 0% on retrofitted airframes. The collapse of expected losses caused a ripple. Ground crews began quietly requesting Marrison's reinforcement guides. Maintenance logs were falsified to hide unapproved welds. Pilots began asking for modified birds by tail number. It reached a point where one squadron unofficially refused to fly standard Mosquitoes. They'd seen the results. And once the pilots believed the fix worked, morale shifted. Suddenly, the Mosquito wasn't seen as a wooden relic. It was a ghost with metal bones, a bomber that could haunt jets. And the RAF had to respond. Quietly, command requested a summary of Marrison's methods, but they didn't approve it. They filed it, buried it in post-war reports. The official line remained. The Mosquito's structural issues were within tolerance, and the reinforcement techniques unverified in formal testing. But the men in the field didn't wait for paperwork. The collapse of the old math, predictable loss rates, performance ceilings, survivability under jet pressure, forced everyone to rethink the Mosquito's death sentence. Because what Marrison's fix revealed wasn't just a technical oversight, it was a systemic failure to listen, to adapt, to believe that frontline experience could rival top-down policy. And in the chaos of late-stage war, where jets ruled the skies and wooden wings were supposed to rot in silence, one mechanic's decision to weld steel into balsa didn't just save a plane. It broke the numbers. And in war, when numbers collapse, the story changes. In late March 1945, just days after the K-2764 incident, No. 571 Squadron at RAF Oakington made a decision that never appeared in any official record. They started asking for Marrison's fix by name. Unofficially dubbed the Ghost Bone Retrofit by the crews, the technique became whispered gospel. Marrison's bracing method was diagrammed on oil-stained napkins, copied onto tool bench scrap paper, and quietly circulated between maintenance crews like contraband. No unit ever admitted it. But when a Mosquito landed with new internal steel braces welded between the wing spars, everyone knew where it came from. At Oakington, Flight Lieutenant Sarah Donnelly, one of the few female engineers in the command chain, recognized the subtle genius of the frame reinforcement. She coordinated with her lead technician, Marcus Kell, to apply the brace on 5 Mosquito BAVs scheduled for deep penetration raids into Bavaria. The missions were high risk, daylight runs over hardened targets. Speed was survival, and every prior mission flown along those corridors had ended with at least one aircraft shot down, by fighters or flak. But not this time. Between March 29th and April 3rd, those 5 retrofitted Mosquitoes flew 7 missions. Combined total flying hours under combat conditions, 58. Not a single airframe was lost. Not one mission aborted. Not one frame cracked. What made the difference wasn't just the reinforcement. It was the confidence. Crews flew faster, pushed the airframes harder. One pilot, squadron leader Ivan Grant, reported diving at 475 mph during evasive maneuvers, above the supposed maximum safe speed, and leveling out without structural damage. "I felt the thing bend," he said, "but not break." The Mosquito was no longer a fragile arrow. It was a hunting spear reinforced with steel. German intercept reports from the region began noting an unusual pattern. Mosquitoes escaping jet pursuit through impossible terrain, holding turns longer, accelerating out of dives with newfound control. It didn't match any known performance data. And so, in Luftwaffe circles, a new rumor emerged that the British had deployed a new Mosquito variant, some hybrid prototype with experimental alloy structures. But it wasn't alloy. It was shop steel braced by mechanics. And it was terrifying the enemy. Back at Oakington, Donnelly and Kell were running on adrenaline. Their success meant more requests, more secret fixes. But they were careful. One error, one incident, and the entire operation could be exposed. They used civilian welding equipment, logged everything as routine maintenance, never submitted upgrade reports. They weren't seeking glory. They were buying time, and their logic was simple. The war was ending. Every pilot saved now might not have to die tomorrow. If steel braces gave them a 30-second edge, that was enough. By mid-April, RAF Oakington became the highest-performing Mosquito unit in Western Europe. Highest mission completion rate, lowest loss percentage. And though command never acknowledged the reason, pilots knew. It wasn't luck. It was leverage. A silent rebellion of logic and welding torch. A fix that worked not because it was sanctioned, but because it was needed. And in that sliver of time, when policy couldn't keep up with desperation, field mechanics did what engineers wouldn't. They evolved the Mosquito, not with design boards, but with grit, steel, and a refusal to let pilots die because someone in London was too slow to change a spec sheet. Flight Officer Cam Rourke was already something of a legend in 143 Squadron. Young, reckless, and brilliant in equal measure, he'd flown over 90 Mosquito missions by the spring of 1945. But what set him apart wasn't his kill count, it was his survival record. Rourke had a habit of coming home from impossible missions. And on April 12, 1945, he did something even his fellow pilots called suicidal. The target was a fuel dump near Ulm, heavily defended and crawling with radar. The plan had been a tight bombing window with heavy P-51 escort. But when the weather closed in and fighter cover was grounded, most crews were pulled from the manifest, not Rourke. He volunteered for a solo run. His Mosquito, tail number VZ-152, had been quietly modified with the Marrison fix, reinforced spars, a new torque bracing system across the landing gear trusses, and internal steel rivets along the lower fuselage curve. The upgrade added 22 pounds of weight, but Rourke didn't care. "If it buys me 2 extra seconds of pullout, it's worth it," he told his ground crew. He took off at 0524 under low cloud. Visibility, less than 3 miles. Target ETA, so 602. On the way in, German radar lit up. 2 Me-262s scrambled from Lechfeld Air Base. By the time Rourke hit the drop zone and loosed his payload, both jets had him in visual contact. Standard Mosquito doctrine said, "Don't fight, flee." But Rourke couldn't just outrun them. So he dove, hard, straight through cloud, pulling negative Gs that slammed his head into the cockpit glass. The Me-262s followed. But their engines weren't built for that kind of atmospheric density. As the jets lost speed adjusting to pressure shifts, Rourke's reinforced Mosquito held together and accelerated. Radar logs later estimated his dive touched 495 km. That would have been suicide in an unmodified frame. But VZ-2 didn't shatter. It bent, groaned, but survived. Rourke pulled up at treetop level, flipped into a shallow right bank, and vanished behind a ridgeline. The Me-262s didn't catch him. They didn't even try. They returned to base reporting a new type of Mosquito, one that somehow gained speed under stress and dodged in low airspace like a bird, not a bomber. Intelligence scoffed. But Rourke knew the truth. It wasn't a new type. It was the old type, rebuilt properly. When Rourke landed back at base, his plane was smoking, scorched and cracked. But the frame had held. His mechanic opened a panel and found 3 braced joints had flexed so hard, the weld seams had left impressions on the adjacent balsa. None of it was regulation. All of it had saved his life. In his debrief, Rourke broke rank. "The Marrison mod works," he said bluntly. "I should be dead, but I'm not. We shouldn't be debating this. We should be standardizing it." Command didn't respond, but word spread. After that mission, pilots began refusing aircraft that hadn't been Marrisoned. Flight crews modified birds in hangars overnight. Toolkits included welding rods next to fuel gauges. The RAF wouldn't officially approve it. But they didn't stop it either. Because after Cam Rourke outran 2 jets, everyone knew. Speed wasn't the problem. Denial was. And when one rogue mechanic welded steel into myth, he didn't just save aircraft. He made legends fly longer than anyone thought possible. By May 1945, the Mosquito was no longer just a bomber or a recon aircraft. In certain circles, those who knew, those who flew, it had become a ghost. Not just fast, but faster than it had any right to be. And it was all because of a fix no one had authorized, built from materials no one respected, welded by a man no one had promoted. Alec Marrison's Rusted-Airframe fix wasn't pretty. It didn't follow diagrams. It violated at least 4 technical orders and bypassed multiple RAF safety checks. But it did one thing that every regulation failed to do. It worked. Not in a lab. Not in simulations, but under fire, under G-force pressure, under screaming jet pursuit. In a war defined by advanced engines, radar breakthroughs, and cutting-edge aeronautics, it was a few ugly slabs of reclaimed steel that held the line. Marrison never wrote a paper. He never gave a lecture. But he gave something better. Time. Seconds that let a pilot pull up. Minutes that let a plane get home. Hours that added up to lives not lost. Command would never decorate him. He was rotated out quietly in July, transferred to a logistics unit in Wales. His file was stamped, "Irregular methods, not recommended for technical review." But in the margins, someone had scribbled a note in pencil. "Mod held. Survived jet pursuit. Frame integrity verified in combat." It was the only official acknowledgement he ever got. Today, K-2764 is gone. Scrapped post-war, no medals, no museums. But in the maintenance bay where it once sat, there's a scratch in the floor. Burned into the concrete where a welding torch fell during a night shift in March 1945. That scratch is still there. No plaque, just a scar. A ghost of the moment one mechanic decided he wouldn't let math dictate who lived or died. The Luftwaffe's jets were faster, that's a fact. The Mosquito was old, another fact. But when a machine built from wood, glue, and desperation leaves 9 Me-262s spinning in its wake, the data doesn't tell the full story. Because war isn't always won by the best specs. Sometimes it's won by the ugliest solution that doesn't break under pressure. The math of destruction said the Mosquito's time was over, but the rusted fix said otherwise. And on that day, speed didn't save them. Steel did. They never built a monument for Alec Marrison. No statue, no medal, no tribute flight. But for the men who lived because of his hands and his stubbornness, he didn't need one. His legacy flew at 400 miles per hour, carried bomb loads over enemy lines, and dodged death because one man refused to accept that good enough was good enough. In a war where machines were meant to be mass-produced, Marrison proved that a single mechanic working off the books with salvaged steel could shift the course of survival. He didn't ask for permission. He gave results. So the next time someone tells you that genius only wears rank, or that innovation has to follow protocol, remember the Mosquito with the welded frame. The plane that bent physics, broke math, and outran the fastest jets in the world with a brace built in secret. And remember this. War may be measured in firepower, but it's won in moments. Moments where someone dares to fix the unfixable, moments where one weld can rewrite history. If you're driven by underdog stories, forgotten heroes, and the raw truth of wartime survival, subscribe now. There's more where this came from, because sometimes the most powerful weapon is the man holding the wrench.